Umbrella created many biological weapons, but few were as disturbing or as dangerous as the G virus. Unlike the T virus, which transformed humans into mindless monsters, the G virus was something else entirely. It didn't just infect, it rewrote. It forced the body into violent, unstable evolution, mutating its host far beyond anything Umbrella could truly control. And in the end, it didn't create perfection. It created one of Umbrella's most horrifying failures. This is the story of the G virus. The G virus was developed deep beneath Raccoon City, inside Umbrella's underground nest laboratory. Its creator was Dr. William Birkin, one of Umbrella's top researchers and one of the company's most dangerous minds. But while Umbrella had already created the T virus, Birkin's work on G represented something far more extreme. Where the T virus caused mutation through infection and necrosis, G appeared to trigger something closer to uncontrolled biological evolution. According to Birkin's own research, the virus rapidly accelerated cell division, allowing the host to regenerate damaged tissue at an astonishing rate. In simple terms, G didn't just keep its host alive, it forced the body to keep changing, and that was exactly what made it so dangerous. What made the G virus unique wasn't just its regenerative power, it was its apparent drive to reproduce. Internal reports recovered from Nest suggest that G hosts rapidly lose their humanity, becoming driven primarily by instinct and reproduction, no longer concerned with reason, language, or identity. Instead, it would seek out genetically compatible hosts and attempt to implant embryos into them. That means the G virus wasn't just designed to create a monster. It was capable of trying to spread itself biologically. And if the host wasn't genetically compatible enough, the result would be a failed, underdeveloped creature instead. That single detail changes how terrifying G really is. Because unlike many of Umbrella's other BOWs, this thing wasn't just a weapon. It behaved like a living organism trying to continue its own existence, and Umbrella was experimenting with it anyway. The documents recovered from Nest make it clear that the G virus was never just theoretical. Umbrella had already moved into human experimentation. One report, titled Research Diary, details a series of horrifying observations. In one test, a G embryo was implanted into a living human subject through a large surgical incision, while medical staff monitored the subject's consciousness as the experiment continued. The subject eventually deteriorated and was disposed of. Another experiment observed what happened when a fully mutated G host was introduced to multiple human test subjects. Within just over 2.5 hours, nearly the entire group had been implanted with embryos. All subjects were later disposed of. And perhaps most disturbingly of all, Umbrella's researchers found that even subjects who had shown some resistance to the T virus were still unable to resist the G virus's mental and biological effects. So, by the time of the Raccoon City outbreak, G wasn't just a lab concept. It had already become one of the most grotesque experiments Umbrella had ever conducted. And then, Umbrella made its move. As Birkin's work on G advanced, it became clear he no longer saw the virus as Umbrella's property. He saw it as his. Recovered emails and internal messages suggest that Birkin had been in unauthorized contact with the US military, and that Umbrella had already grown suspicious of him. One message even warns him directly that he is under investigation for claiming ownership of the G project. That was the breaking point. Umbrella security forces were sent into Nest to recover the virus and remove Birkin if necessary. When they confronted him, Birkin refused to hand it over. And in that moment, Umbrella effectively signed its own death warrant, because after being gunned down by the very company he had helped empower, William Birkin made one final decision. He injected himself with the G virus, and everything changed. Birkin's transformation is one of the clearest examples of what the G virus actually does to a host. At first, the changes are horrifying, but still recognizably human. His body begins to distort, muscles overgrow, bone structure warps, and the now iconic eye begins to emerge from his flesh. This is what most people refer to as G Stage 1. And even here, it's obvious that this isn't controlled evolution. It's violent, parasitic, and unstable. But the real horror of G is that it doesn't stop there. As Birkin continues to suffer damage, the virus simply forces further mutation. Each time his body is pushed closer to death, G responds by making him something worse, larger, more aggressive, less human. By his later forms, Birkin is barely recognizable as a man at all. He becomes a mass of exposed tissue, eyes, claws, and instinct, a creature driven not by intelligence, but by survival and reproduction. And that's the most important thing to understand about G. It didn't make Birkin stronger in any meaningful sense. It consumed him. What survived wasn't William Birkin. It was the virus, using what remained of him as raw biological material. In theory, Umbrella wanted a new biological weapon, something stronger than the tyrants, something more adaptable, something harder to kill. And in some ways, the G virus achieved that. Its regenerative power was terrifying. Its mutation potential was almost limitless. And its ability to keep evolving made it one of the most resilient organisms in the series. But that same adaptability is also exactly why it failed. Because G didn't create a stable super soldier. It created runaway mutation, a life form that couldn't stop changing, a weapon that couldn't be controlled, and an organism that, in the end, became less and less useful the further it evolved. That's what makes the G virus so fascinating in Resident Evil lore. It represents Umbrella's obsession taken to its logical extreme, not just creating life, but trying to force evolution itself, and losing control of it almost immediately. By the end of the Raccoon City incident, Nest itself was already collapsing. Containment had failed. The facility entered self-destruct. And the G virus, like so many of Umbrella's creations, was buried beneath the ruins of the company that made it. But what makes the G virus memorable isn't just what it did to William Birkin. It's what it represents. This wasn't just another monster. It was proof of how far Umbrella was willing to go in pursuit of power, control, and biological superiority. And like so many of their experiments, it didn't end in perfection, it ended in horror.